Hey guys, hope you're doing well. I've got so much to say about Montreal, so many questions to ask. Typical format, you know how it goes. Gonna start with kind of the things that I really loved about Montreal. Got to talk about some of the stuff that I don't love and have a lot of questions because I do so much learning through this series. So if you're new, welcome. This is what you're going to be looking at for as long as I ramble. So for context, I just spent the entire month, last month here in Montreal. For those who don't know me, I'm originally from the US, but I move to a new country every month, just trying to learn what the world has to offer, learn about different cultures. Wow, is there so much to say about Montreal? Let's talk about the good. I was warned, hey, you should not come and spend late October through November here. It's going to be cold, like you missed it. Go away, it's not worthwhile. I feel the complete opposite. Now, that might have been that I just like completely lucked out with the weather. The weather's been great while we've been here, which I recognize isn't necessarily always normal this time of year, but it was great. I love visiting places like right in that off season before you get to the really terrible weather. It's easier to get a sense of like what the local culture really is about, which is what I'm looking for when I travel. And it's easier because most of the tourists are gone, right? From my understanding here in Montreal, summer is going to be the big time that if people are going to come up and visit, that's when they're going to be here, which means this time of year, because everybody's like, nah, the weather's bad, go somewhere else, you really get to see the local culture. There's just not as much tourism stuff to break through. So I really enjoyed spending the time here. I think this culture is so interesting. And I've done so much Canada over the last year. Again, for context, I've done Vancouver, I've done Toronto, I've done Quebec City, and I've done Montreal. I know this shouldn't be like trying to assess each city and like rank them, but if I had to rank them, they're all so different, right? Vancouver is unmatched in terms of like just the raw beauty, the access to nature. That's unquestioned. It's incredible. Toronto is kind of grand, in its own way. Quebec City is perhaps the most charming. I don't know, but Montreal just seems to have the culture. This place is just cool. I did one more of these series about Copenhagen. And the word that I kept coming back to was this place is just really cool. The culture is cool. The people are cool. It just has something special to it. And that's how I felt here in Montreal. Also, one of the things that's not so cool, this whole city is under construction, or at least the area where I'm staying. So hopefully you don't hear all the construction going on behind me. But it really is such a unique thing, and where I recognize that prices are definitely going up for locals here. Housing is definitely a problem, and that seems to be a problem across the board in Canada and in many other countries, around the world right now. But this seems to be a place where there is life on the streets. There is life in the environments, like the coffee shops. We're going to get to the food because I consider myself to be a huge foodie. It's probably my favorite thing about travel is getting to learn about different cultures through food. And I've just been blown away by the food here in Montreal. And I've been trying to identify, like, okay, what is it? What is it specifically about the food that I think is so special? What makes this unique? And I think it's this. I think, one, it's big city amenities where you have just about every type of cuisine. And there's so much diversity here that it's one thing to have a bunch of different types of cuisines. It's another thing to do all those cuisines well. And this seems to be a place where people just know their food. They know their way around a kitchen. Like, the food is done really well. So it doesn't matter. You don't have to pay up for that, fancy Michelin star level, fancy dining experience to have good food. Even at kind of like that, I don't want to say necessarily street food level, because I don't know that that's a fair way to frame it here. But some of those lower tiers where local people are going to be eating, I found the food to be a much higher quality than in many other cities around the world. And I've loved getting to explore it. And there are so many places that I have not had the opportunity to try yet. And I'm building out kind of like a whole recommendations guide of kind of what were my favorites, what I'd recommend tourists go to. So if you are a tourist, you can check the link down below if I ever make that and if it's ready. Hopefully that's helpful for you. But the food has been incredible. I think another piece where you talk about big city amenities with regards to the food is the accessibility, meaning it's just about everywhere. And more importantly, it's not just early. Like, there are 24-hour places here, which maybe I've just been doing too much travel in places that aren't like those 24-hour cities. It seems like on the whole, there aren't many of those cities in the world. Montreal is one of those cities, which I just love. Like, there's just a special culture that comes along with having access to things being open really late. And I've loved that. So food here has been just a huge plus. A couple of the other things that just are so cool and that I really loved. One, the university, McGill, I think is how it's pronounced. Such a cool like integration with the city. It feels like you have so much here, because if you've ever been to Montreal, you'll know that yes, you have the city part, then you have the old town part, which is kind of like nuzzled right into like the bigger city, where you're going to have the big buildings and just kind of the modern feel. You have Old Town right in there, which is unique, and that's definitely the touristy area. But then you have these like, I don't know if you want to call them boroughs, neighborhoods, little pockets where locals live that you have great access to, and each one is so different. The constant throughout all of it is they feel cool. There is a lot of just life and energy in each little pocket, which was just incredible. And I haven't touched all of them. And I'm somebody who spends like all day outside walking. Like, I try to get to all these places. I am just, there's no shortage of places to explore in Montreal. And I will have left after a full month still feeling like, man, there's just so much more to see. So I love that. Like, that's just, it's incredible. The shopping. I'm not somebody who really shops much. As a traveler, you learn to travel with very few things. I typically have like a uniform, like really one pair of pants, a couple of the same exact shirts. Like, this is one of my nicer things. But I recognize that the shopping here is just expansive. Again, big city amenity. You have all of your like high-end retailer if you're looking for that, but also like really good like vintage and just like thrift stores everywhere, like scattered. Like, it's just so cool. And the people, the culture, one of the just absolute best parts about Montreal is the coffee shop culture. And it's so hard to articulate this in a way that makes sense to a lot of people. I have the privilege of, again, living this lifestyle where I'm constantly exploring a new city. And I've been doing this for, over 3 years now. Some cities, every city has a coffee culture, right? To some degree, but it's how do locals actually interact with that? How's that come out? What's the culture actually like? And if I had to explain Montreal's, it's that the coffee culture really revolves around community. And what I mean by that is a lot of coffee cultures are, hey, we've got really good coffee. Come for the coffee and go. You have other cultures where it's, hey, we've got a few coffee shops. This is mostly for students, and that's who's going to be in the coffee shops. This is a place where, one, the sheer amount of coffee shops here is just insane. I mean, to me, one of the best coffee shop cities in the world is Amsterdam. And I thought Amsterdam had a lot of coffee shops. But this place, I've been to over 20. Like, on my list, I have over 20 different coffee shops that I've tried at this point. And I have some favorites that I have gone back to again and again. I've had a lot of coffee this month. But each coffee shop is so unique in that the style, the theme is just, it's slightly different. It's going to be a little bit different everywhere you go. But the one constant is that people are talking in the coffee shops. It's not just, hey, I'm going to bury my head in my laptop and, do work. Or, hey, I'm not just grabbing coffee to go. And of course, you can do those things. You're not going to not see people working, at the coffee shops. But there's just a liveliness and a culture around community within the coffee shop where people are just interacting, which is just special. It's sad to say that is special, because you would think that as a species we'd figure out that, hey, like, it's just better when it's like this. And Montreal has that figured out. Like my favorite coffee shop is this one spot. I think it's called like Cafe Eclair, and it's in a local area town. You walk in, it's a pretty like tight, almost intimate place, and the concept is it's like one long table, and the barista is like, on one side of the table so he can kind of serve everybody at once, but you're all around this big community table, and there's just so much conversation, so much happening, so much connection. And I think that really, I guess, probably now that I finally got myself to the word that, oh yeah, that works, is connection. The coffee shop culture really seems to be about connection. Would I say that the best coffee in the world is here in Montreal? No, probably not. Not saying it's bad. It is good. But the connection in these coffee shops is something that is really, really special. So absolutely love that. Another thing that is completely random, I didn't expect to observe this, and that's one of the cool things about traveling is you never know what you're gonna, stumble upon and what some of the takeaways are. And I don't know that this is really a takeaway, just something that I thought was kind of funny. The squirrels in this town are absolutely nuts. Like, one, they're a little bit bigger. Like, they seem to really be more like raccoons. Like, they are in the trash constantly, but they are so just unafraid of coming up to humans and interacting. I don't know that there's any takeaway, but if you're from Montreal, recognize that you guys have some nutty squirrels, and if you're somebody who's visited Montreal, maybe you've seen those as well. But I do have to talk about some of the things that I don't love as much. And then we'll come back to a couple of the things that are unique, and I do still have some questions. One of the things that I don't love is from a public transit perspective. This is, again, a unique city in that you have the big city amenities where you do have like the proper metro, and the metro is great. A couple gripes. One, this is not the easiest place to get to and from the airport. Now, I recognize that you guys are building kind of like a metro stop that I think is going to be done in like 2027, so we're still a ways off from that. So getting from the airport to like the downtown area, a bit more of a hassle or a bit more expensive. You take the bus, or a shuttle, or you could Uber. We ended up Ubering, and it was fine. It's a quick drive, which is nice, but I do recognize that as a pain point for travelers coming in, is that metro isn't quite ready. 2027, different story. But one of the things that I really didn't expect to see, but it was very much a reality. I've, again, had the privilege of using so many public transit systems all across the world, and this metro system is good. It works well, but it seems a little bit dated. One, just in the fact that you can't use tap to pay. Like, you have to have a physical ticket or that Opus card that you buy, which, if you haven't been here, it's just this card that you buy and you reload, which a lot of cities have always used systems like that, but most of the cities that are really like investing in infrastructure now, you can either just use your phone with tap to pay, you could tap your card. It's just a little bit quicker. And I did find that I was waiting in line to, re-up my Opus card or initially buy that. The line always seemed to be a little bit long trying to purchase your ticket to utilize the metro. And maybe that was just my experience. So locals, if you feel like I'm off base there, of course, feel free to disagree with me. I do a lot of learning through you all in the comment sections through these. But I didn't love that component of things. Another thing which I've talked about in every Canadian city that I've been to, it's always hard to grapple with. When you're in a big city, you see the big wealth, right? You see the big buildings, you see the fancy things, the dinners that cost hundreds of dollars, all of that exists. And at the same time, you see people on the streets right outside of those buildings. And in just about every pocket in this city, unlike other cities in Canada, like Vancouver comes to mind, where the population that's experiencing homelessness is kind of all in one general area. That's not the case here in Montreal. You're really going to interact with homelessness just about everywhere, and that's always just so sad to see. I wish that we had answers as a species and could figure out how to fix the problem, but clearly we haven't, and that always sucks, especially coming from the countries that are a little bit more progressive and you would think would be able to, have the capacity and from a desire standpoint to fix those problems, when they aren't able to fix it, that can be disheartening. But again, that's coming from the American perspective. That's not a problem for Montreal. It's not unique to Montreal, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That's something that unfortunately is a reality in many spots. One of the things that I found so interesting, and Sarah and I were talking about this, when we're in France, for context, obviously, a lot of French spoken up here. I recognize that they're two very different cultures, but we found some similarities, and I'd love to know from a local perspective. When we're in France, one of the things that we always talk about is children seem so happy, and also they don't seem like children. Which I think what we mean by that is typically when you travel and you see children, they're kids, right? Tough to control. They're unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen. A lot of the time there's crying and screaming. That's comes with the territory, right? And I'm not saying that doesn't happen in France, but parenting in France, I don't know if it's the parenting, but it seems like that might be at play, is just different in that, one, things are so family focused. You see less of those public, I don't want to say outbursts, but just like disruptions. You don't see the similar type of behavior. Something is oddly polite and just different in French culture, and we recognize that here in Montreal. And the first time that we recognized it here was we were walking, and there was some other lady walking behind us, and we hear her telling this story, and it's her kind of complaining about somebody. I don't remember the specifics, but she was talking to somebody as if she was giving all the gossip, like she's just spilling, right? Hey, you do you, lady. And eventually, we pull over to kind of look at directions, and she passes us, and we realize the conversation that was being had, we thought was between probably some 30-year-old woman and one of her good friends, but that wasn't the case. It was two very young children with her. And when I mean young children, under the age of 10, for sure. And one of the things that we correlate or are trying to connect the dots with is it seems like in French culture, which we saw here as well, is that parents talk to kids like they're adults. In other words, kids aren't babied. And that doesn't mean that they're expected to do everything themselves, but from a communication standpoint, people don't seem to dumb things down for kids. And as a result, the kids just are unkid-like, but in a positive way. And that's not anti-kid, right? You know what I'm trying to say? There's just not as much of the public outcry, the public outcry isn't the right word. Man, words are tough today. You just don't see the same dynamic that you're used to associating with kids. And it's something that is kind of nice and just interesting. So I'd be curious if you are a parent here in Montreal, or if you've seen that here in Montreal, or somewhere in France. Does there seem to be any merit to what I'm saying, or am I just completely nuts? Because both Sarah and I feel really strongly about that point, and we thought it was interesting. A couple other notes that I've got down here. One thing that I found interesting in the coffee shops, again, because there was so much connection, one of the topics that was discussed a lot that you just overhear people talking about was politics, believe it or not. But not politics and hey, this person is right or this person is wrong. But there were actually quite a bit of policy conversation, and I don't know if that was skewed because the U.S. election was happening, while I was here. So obviously that has some impact. So I'd be curious to know if you're a local, are you used to hearing those sorts of things in coffee shops as well? That was something that just stuck out that, again, you don't have in many other places in the world that I thought was interesting. So I guess one of the other things that this is more for tourists. I was really contemplating whether or not I was going to base myself here in Montreal or in Quebec City. And we elected, obviously, for Montreal. And I do think it's worth noting that, man, I am glad that I picked here. Most people will tell you to pick Montreal over Quebec City in terms of basing yourself, but there is a pretty big community online, at least, that seems to say that Quebec City is like superior and just like much cuter, more charming, more unique. And it's not to say that Quebec City isn't those things. It's a wonderful city as well. But wow, am I glad that I picked here. Like, this city just has so much to offer. So if you're somebody who is trying to make that same decision, my personal recommendation would also definitely be here. One of the things, though, that is also just kind of unique is each city you interact with differently. And one of the ways that I like to think about this is, how is the average day spent? And I recognize I'm not necessarily talking about average day for local. I'm talking about average day for me, which I know isn't necessarily always representative. But one of the things that's unique here is the days just, they go by like that. Like, they just fly. And one of the most interesting things is I always look back on a day and I'm like, wow, today just flew by. What the heck happened? What did I do? And there's never a big activity, like, ever. And what's so interesting is, here in Montreal, if somebody were to say, hey, I'm coming to Montreal, what do I have to go and see? Which I am making a video and, going to explain that, or try to. One of the most interesting things is there's not a specific attraction or even 2 or 3 or things that I'm like, hey, this is what you have to go and do. Instead, in Montreal, it's like the day flies by, because it seems like the culture, at least for me, the culture was, you go from one spot to another in terms of like coffee shops. Now you go and you try this place, and now you maybe take a nice walk because there's so many beautiful, places to walk, or maybe take a bike ride because it's such a biker friendly, city. And okay, now you're at another coffee shop and you get caught up in a conversation with some, complete stranger. Now you're at another coffee shop and you're doing tea this time because you've done too much caffeine, and you strike up a conversation like with the barista, and it's just the day just goes. Because rather than doing something big, you're just constantly jumping from small thing to small thing to small thing. And because there's so little effort in doing the jumping, because it's never like, hey, I'm gearing up for this big touristy type of day, because that never happens, everything just kind of flows and feels easy. And because of that, I feel like, for me at least, the days just, again, went by really, really quick in a positive way. So I'd say culturally, again, for me, I loved the interaction with the city, in that you don't have to do anything, but at the same time, you will never leave a day here feeling like, I did nothing today, or I can't reflect on it, because there's so many small conversations, small things that happen that, again, it's where the life of the city really comes to play, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? I don't know. It does in my mind. A couple questions for locals, or just people who have lived here, but probably for the locals. One of the things that's really interesting is, obviously, with the cold weather, you guys have built infrastructure for kind of like this underground city. If you haven't been here, so much of the city is connected via the metro, but the metro isn't, hey, you get out of the metro and you just walk upstairs and you're back out on the street. Those do exist, but there are also a couple main metro stops where you're like, hey, you get off the metro and you're in a big building, or you're in this kind of underground world, which I recognize is to protect you from the winter, which I recognize you're about to have here, so I'm sorry. I will not be joining you for that. I'm out of here soon. But what I'm curious about is, one, are winters as bad as people make them seem? But two, during the winters, because you have that infrastructure of that underground city where theoretically you really don't have to ever go outside, or you don't have to go outside much, my question is, do you? Is the culture here that you spend winter underground and inside, or do the streets, I guess, still feel the same? Meaning, when I walk down to Mile End and do, an hour and a half walk from the, downtown area, every street feels lively. There's things to look at. There's people. There's that just energy, because that's where the people are. So I'm curious, in the winter, does that still exist, or does everybody kind of migrate down to that underground, world that you guys have created? I'm curious. And another question for locals, this one definitely for locals, because you guys have that food culture where it's like you can have nice things without being pretentious, which I love. That is exceptional. Rest of the world, take note. My question is, are you willing to share some details of like what spots are your favorite? Like when you go online, obviously you see, okay, you got to try Schwartz, or maybe it's Lester's, maybe it's Deli on Main, like whichever, smoked meat spot you go to, right? That is a really unpretentious, food. What do you feel like are the spots that a lot of tourists end up missing that you think that they should explore? What are your personal favorites within the city? I'd love to know because during my next visit, which I absolutely will be back, I definitely want to try all of those. So again, maybe more questions than I have answers for, but overall, I'm just so appreciative to have gotten to spend this month here in Montreal. It's really been special. Met a lot of really cool people, and I'm gonna miss it. This really is one of those spots where some cities you leave and you're ready to go. Other cities you're like, I'll never be ready to go, and I'm just looking forward to the next time that I return. The latter is where I find myself feeling with Montreal. So if you are a tourist and all of this sounds great and you're thinking about planning a trip, I do have a video of all the things that I wish I had known before coming to Montreal, some of those practical tips. You can watch it right here. And also locals, feel free to check that out as well. Tell me if I'm off base. Again, no hard feelings. I want to know. I want to get good information out there to people. So feel free to rip me apart or help me in the comment sections to just educate people. But I appreciate you guys as always for watching this. Look forward to reviewing the comments in the comment section, and we'll catch you guys next time.